All right, my conversation right I'm about to introduce you to is Ben Johnson. He's the CTO of Obsidian Security, and he was the former CTO and co-founder of Carbon Black. And the other co-founder of Obsidian is the former CTO of Cylance. So that's very interesting when you have two CTOs form a company in this industry. This is where the market's going, is SaaS security. And I love their approach to SaaS security because this is my new passion area for you, is to really look at SaaS as a security realm that you're not going to address with endpoint security. Next Gen AV doesn't help you with this. And so as you look at frictionless security for SaaS, I love that. We get into some specifics, Ben and I, talking about how to secure your SaaS applications. I'm talking I'm talking at all: Workday, Salesforce, OneDrive, 365, Box, Dropbox, G Suite, all of it. Your credentials, how you're looking at credentials, and when you deprovision and provision users, how do you get a handle on this? It's not, now your assets are not behind 100% behind your firewalls anymore, that in a traditional data center. So anyway, I'm going to cut it over to Ben and I's interview right now. Have a great day. Ben, I want to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me.
So I was really excited because, having seen a bit of your story on the RSA Sandbox, in the Innovation Sandbox, I wanted to kind of have a larger context to talk more about Obsidian and your organization, and also your trajectory individually. I think that's really interesting for people to understand kind of the story, the backstory that led to everything. So maybe we can talk about what led you to be the point you're at right now, and talk a little bit about who you are and like sort of what got you to where you are right now.
Sure. You might have to shut me up because it's always kind of easy to talk about yourself, or at least for a lot of people. You get someone asking, "Hey, what's your story?" and the person rambles for an hour. Hopefully, this will just be a couple minutes. Yeah, so I actually grew up in Vermont, and I didn't have TV, and I'm not sure if you're asking me to go but this far back, but I promise
Yes,
I'll get to the good stuff. Yeah, so I grew up in Vermont, and we didn't.
Were you a skier? Were you a skier in Vermont?
Yes, we would get a season's pass to Killington, which is a pretty famous mountain, right? If you made honor roll in high school, so we would all go skiing, all the different mountains, snowboarding, whatever.
My favorite is Killington. Growing up, we used to leave out of Boston, and just the fathers used to pile the kids on at 5 a.m, and we're actually, yeah, about 5, and be up to Killington. Killington's pretty far up there in the state.
Yeah. Yeah. So I didn't really have a lot of TV, which led me to do two things: play sports and do computers. And when I went to college at University of Chicago, I had already known that I was going to be a computer science major. So I was just kind of hardcore coder, computer science, etc. And when I was at University of Chicago, I saw the movie Enemy of the State. So Will Smith, Gene Hackman, and NSA. And I was like, this is awesome. And at the time, NSA was like no such agency. It wasn't being talked about. It wasn't on CNN, et cetera. And so I ended up applying to NSA, and I got in. And so then I went and worked there, and got security clearances and took oaths and all that stuff. It was unbelievable. Basically worked there, worked in the intelligence community from 2000 to 2007, kind of hardcore cybersecurity and software development. And it was amazing. And if you can imagine, 2000 to 2007, we had a lot of sort of international conflict and armed conflict, and so we got to do some really cool operations that I would have done for free, but they paid us. Right. So that was awesome. After a while, though, I get tired of a little bit tired of the DC area and, security clearances. And I just needed a break and stuff like that. Right. And so ended up doing a little bit of work in the actually finance and trading world. But after 2 years, I missed security. So then I said, okay, well, I want to do security, but I want to do more of like the commercial, try to build products and that kind of thing. And so started doing some of that, and my co-founder Mike Viscuso and I came up with the idea for Carbon Black, which was endpoint security, basically next generation antivirus, if you want to say that. But basically, we took that from nothing to about 800 people in early 2017 when I decided to move on. And it was a fantastic ride. I traveled the world, 100 flights a year globally. I'd be in 6 time zones in 7 days, and just killed my body. But basically we grew and it was really fun, but I missed the building of, kind of a few people in a garage kind of thing, right?
Sure.
And so then I decided, hey, let's do something new. I ran into Glenn Chisholm and Matt Wolf, and we decided to start Obsidian, and really said, hey, we need to focus on cloud security, or more specifically SaaS security. So we formed a company actually out in beautiful Newport Beach, and here we are. We're about 50 people. We're in the market. We built some cool technology, and I'm the CTO here, and we're kind of off and running, and focused on cloud.
So a little bit, just reversing a little bit. So what made you and think that cloud's like going to be a problem, in the sense that it was a spark of, okay, this is something I got to go solve, in my garage again and build net new out? Is it because of the legacy and the trajectory of the carbon black direction? Nothing negative about carbon black. It's got its own momentum though, and you saw another shift happening that more interested you. Is that how it happened?
Yeah. So I think part of it was our own feelings and thoughts. And then part of it was we actually went out and talked to like 300 different enterprises. Like basically all the people that I had sold carbon black software to or worked with, and a lot of amazing customers. And then people Glenn was from Cylance, our competitor. he had talked to a lot of companies out there too. And so we went back to those great people on the security teams or whatever, and said, hey, what are some of your challenges around cloud, or around user, like what your users are doing? Like you have endpoint security from, Carbon Black or Cylance or some of these other products where you're monitoring your laptops, but like, what about what your users are doing, and how is cloud factoring in? And a lot of what we heard was people had no idea what the heck was going on in their SaaS accounts, right? Like all the emails moving to Office 365 or G Suite or Salesforce is getting super popular. Source code is flying up to GitHub, et cetera. And the security team had spent so much time on network security monitoring and then endpoint monitoring that now this cloud area was like this whole new world. And the business was moving fast, and more businesses were saying that they were becoming cloud first. So I think part of it was us just seeing like the general trends, but a lot of it was us just surveying the market and saying, what's a major concern? And it turned out to be SaaS.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And what's interesting is I think people, I agree with you. Having seen that, is the next gen AV is hot, and then all of a sudden they're really not, and they're moving their email systems, and they're starting to put some significant systems in Azure or AWS. But I think people, well, maybe there's confusion. And one of the things we can talk about, I like to start, is with identity, because you sort of have these identity folks that are in the midst of this that are, I think, they're not doing this intentionally, but it's making it confusing, because when you have Microsoft Azure AD running everything, and then all of a sudden you've got Okta and Duo and these other big players that are scaling, just typical Microsoft. It's like nobody uses Microsoft backup. People just plug on their tool on top of Microsoft. Yet identity has been, Active Directory has been running things forever, and now you've got another layer, and then all of a sudden now you got to deal with the absolute cloud, the SaaS security, and so maybe you can lend some direction there.
Oh yeah, yeah. So with endpoint security, we were focused on binaries and malware and processes and things like that. But when you start thinking about SaaS and cloud, a lot of it comes down to accounts, which then therefore map to people's identities, or like the employees in your company, and each employee has 20 accounts or whatever, right? And so you have to think about it through the lens of identity, or of your users, and try to understand like who it is, and then what access they have and what they're doing with it. And so yeah, what we found is you're probably trying to stitch everything together at the single sign-on point, like the authentication. Everything's gonna, and you just sort of said this, like everything's gonna log in through Microsoft or Okta or one of these providers, which is great user experience, right? Like wherever you need to get to in your company, you go through Okta or Microsoft or G Suite or whatever. Cool. But then the couple challenges start to really emerge, which is most of these SaaS applications have become platforms, and they're trying to really retain the sort of authorization and sort of configuration layer internal, right? Like, yeah, you log in through Okta or whatever, but then once you get into, Box or some of these other tools, like you're mapped to a particular role or you have certain privileges and stuff like that. So those are pretty disparate. And then the second thing is the behavior. Like, yeah, you need to understand who's logging in or who has an account, but then you need to understand, are people sharing files too broadly or downloading too much or whatever. And so what we ran into was, yeah, there is this intersection of identity and security. And what we found is when you talk to people whose job is identity, their primary concern is much more of an IT concern, which is making sure the employees have the appropriate tools to do their job and they can sign in and they were
Yeah.
provisioned the right accounts. And then when they leave, they're deprovisioned.
Yeah.
But all of that, like in between time, which could be 10 years or whatever, like the identity team has lots of work to do, but they're too busy to worry about like security threats and stuff, at least for the most part. And I'm generalizing the heck out of this. But from what we found is like the identity team wants to care more about day-to-day compromise and threats and all this other stuff, but they're so focused on the new employees coming in, the employees going out, this person changed their job, whatever. They have to do so much of that stuff and try to stitch all these different accounts together that they can't really then sort of assess how things are going and what's going on from a behavioral perspective. So yeah, it is a really interesting world that completely woke me up, and I didn't have to do any of this back in the endpoint days.
Yeah, it's a really big problem to solve because it's like the traditional. When I first started going to the Burton Group conferences back in the mid 2000s, and they were the big identity. They've since been gobbled up by Gartner many years ago, but it's the hardcore identity PKI guys, and it's like the role-based access control. Who's the person's role, what access do they have rights to, and then how do you control that? And man, that's really difficult for small, medium, not even that super small, but like most companies, that's a super hard challenge. That was behind the firewall. Now we're outside the firewall. Holy mackerel!
Yeah, I heard this great quote from a friend, which is, we're creating the same problems in 10 days in the cloud that took us 10 years to create on-prem, right? Because everything's accelerated so fast. You can click a few things and all of a sudden but this whole notion of, and I don't know maybe what other people refer to this as, but this whole notion of like identity creep or identity sprawl or privilege creep or whatever, it's incredibly real in the sense that when someone comes to you and needs access, you want to make sure they can do their job, so you give them access, and often there's not a lot of scrutiny, and there's sometimes you give them too much access so they don't come back and ask for more, or you make a mistake or whatever. And you unfortunately know in the security side that if you really don't say yes, people are still going to do whatever they want to do to get their job done, and so they're going to try to circumvent, right? And so yeah, what happens is you have all these different systems now that may or may not be tied together through something like SSO or the authentication choke point. And then so they're all over the place, and there's more and more being added, and it's really hard to keep track. And we haven't even talked about like contractors or guests yet. I mean, that's a whole nother nightmare. But yeah, it's just like incredible how much access we all have. And I don't know if there's a newer stat than this, but something like if you just have 18 employees, you probably already have 80 SaaS apps, because there's just so many, and it's just some crazy explosion like that. And trying to maintain who has control and who has access and who's the privileged users and all that. I mean, it's a lot of work for a large company, let alone a SMB or a mid-market kind of company.
So are you doing any sort of, are you looking at behavior? So let's give an example. Let's say teams, what I hear from a lot of companies right now is that they're outside their four walls. Now they typically, they're in either G Suite or most in the Microsoft suite, but they've now really are testing out Teams, and they're beyond testing, they're actually using Teams. And then they also find out that if they have contractors, they've started to look at how they can get contractors into Teams, which is a whole other level of complexity with authentication and knowing who's who. Where do you fit? Do you fit on the knowing who's who and seeing when people are breaking certain parameters of access, or are you also providing like a shim for threat management within inside as that handshake, that user goes in and out of that platform?
Sure, yeah. So I think one way to think about us is kind of like EDR for SaaS. And what we
Okay.
do is we call ourselves cloud detection and response. But really what we're doing is we're saying, hook us up to all your platforms, and we're going to grab the users, the roles and privileges, and then the behavior, and really
Okay.
unite all that within an app, but also across, if you hooked up a bunch of apps to our system, we're going to give you that view, like sort of that single pane of glass, to use that
Yeah.
overused analogy or term. But you know we're going to give you that view into all these different systems of, okay, now you know who has access, what the privileged users have access to, or who the privileged users are, and then what people are doing. And so we're not trying to be the ones that are the authentication provider, like an Okta or something. They do
Sure.
a good job there. But if you think about, like, okay, what happens after login? Like, who is this user? What role do they have? And then, are they accessing different files? Are they coming in from strange locations that look like compromise or impossible travel? Are they granting access to other users? So we're really mapping out this whole notion of like who your users are, what privileges they have, and then what their behavior is, but trying to do it across a bunch of applications.
Okay. And so really from the behavior point of view, for example, if someone has access to Box or Dropbox, and so permission, so essentially file storage, and that from a governance perspective, Barry and Mike are allowed to have access to a certain file structure, but then all of a sudden they call into help desk and the help desk gives them a change. You're going to see those change and be able to flag that as a violation potentially.
Yeah, so a lot of what we do well, our primary focus is threefold, which is really the detection,
Yep.
response, or sort of investigation, and then like kind of hardening.
Okay.
And so yeah, what we're trying to do is really understand who has access and who has privilege, as I mentioned, and then the behavior. And when you combine all that, it's like, okay, where do things look suspicious, from an external adversary perspective? Where do things look suspicious from an insider perspective? And then there's also like the times where it's not malicious intent, it's just like you accidentally shared a file, or whatever, too broadly, put it on the whole public internet, etc. And then give you the ability to go investigate and dive in and really see like what happened, or who accessed this publicly shared file, stuff like that. And then there's the whole like sort of hardening or hygiene component. It's like, which users have not enabled MFA, maybe which users, and some of this gets into the governance stuff, like, hey, Ben is a admin in Box, but he's also an admin in G Suite. Maybe that's expected, but that adds extra risk because now he's like sort of twice as important, or whatever. Or more importantly, his credentials are even that much more important. As well as like, where do you have accounts that aren't in use anymore? Because that tends to be a huge area of risk. We see that all the time. Like, you didn't deprovision accounts when people left, and now they're getting compromised because no one's updated passwords, or stuff like that. And so yeah, there's just kind of a whole set of problems, but really I think it comes down to looking for external adversaries and trying to keep them out,
Yeah.
looking for insider activity, which could be malicious or accidental, being able to kind of audit or understand all that activity from like a incident response or auditing perspective, and then the whole like sort of governance and hygiene perspective of just like, how do I make it so I have fewer problems, right? And we try to combine all that, and again, do it across these different applications.
Now, on the response side, is that your team responding to the point of contact, or is it you're enabling them to respond, or you have like a managed services model that you're depending on a managed service provider to respond?
Yeah, so we ourselves are primarily a technology provider. We do work with all of our customers, and I think if you ask them, they'd tell you we're quite responsive, and we're here to help, whether it's a technical issue or like a security issue. But primarily, we are a technology provider, and so we've partnered with incident response firms, the ones you call, or like your lawyer calls if you have an issue.
Yeah.
They parachute in, and one of the first things they do is install Obsidian, which is really cool. And then we also partner with MSSPs. So we have MSSPs that help cater to, especially like small to medium-sized companies. Certainly, enterprises sometimes have MSSPs too. But if you don't have a security team, or you just need some supplemental help,
Yeah.
we do work with the MSSP, where that team is the one looking at your alerts and helping you investigate and that kind of thing.
Like a company like mine, for example, would be a perfect fit.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious about how you see complexity And how do you think about something that people use the word, I know it's overused, but the single pane of glass. I joke about it and I call it LPOG, limited panes of glass. And then I just heard someone say the other day, limited security tooling, because there's a cost of having so many security tools and there's a complexity. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that, and how does it go into your thinking and your development approach?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough problem, and fortunately, in my role, I've been able to kind of geek out with hundreds of organizations. Where I'm the CTO, and I was CTO at Carbon Black, so I get to go and the sales team would worry about the deals. I get to just sort of have the nice technical conversations with the CISO or the security team or whatever. And so I get to hear a lot of pain points too, and I also have to worry about defending Obsidian ourselves,
Yeah,
right? So lots of different viewpoints here, but yeah, I mean, tool fatigue is real, or data fatigue or alert fatigue, all these different terms within security. Like, we just have a lot of stuff going on and not nearly enough people. And so, yeah, I think a couple things. First of all, like, the way we've approached it is we've said, hey, if you install us, you no longer have to bounce between 4 or 5 different native consoles. Like, you don't have to go into Office 365 and then Box and then
sure.
Salesforce and then Zoom or whatever. Just come to our tool. So we're trying to actually reduce the number of screens. Having said that, I don't think you can ever get to a single pane of glass,
Yeah.
because yeah, you're going to have to go with like sort of lowest common denominator, or make things so generalized and generic that like it's sort of lost the context and the intelligence around, like, SaaS or cloud should probably be here, and then maybe endpoint data over here, maybe like network monitoring over here. So you have these sort of like domain specific capabilities or tools. You can
Yeah.
still funnel all your alerts and maybe some other information together, but you're going to have to go to some different tools, because you can't get an optimized view that works for everything, right? It's just not really realistic. And then, yeah, when people buy tools, they don't get 100% of the value out of any single tool. Like, I guarantee it. You can mark my words. You're not getting 100% of the value that you could be out of any tool. And that's not really anyone's fault. It's like, you buy a tool for a certain use case or certain feature, it has a whole bunch of other capabilities, you don't take the time to use it, or it has a bunch of extra intelligence, you don't take the time. And that's just reality. But
Yeah.
like, the point is, how much can you get? 50%? Can you get 80%? Whatever it is. And my point would be, find a few tools, whether it's something like us, whether it's like EDR, whether it's a few other tools, where you get really, really good at something, and
Yeah.
everything else you're pretty good at. And so, yeah, I mean, to your point, and sorry for the rambling, but there's a ton of tools. Everyone has a ton of stuff. Like, make sure you take advantage of what you have, and sometimes your tool can even help IT or other parts of the business, so you actually get more value out of it.
Well, one of the ways too is like I always, and that's what attracted me to the conversation with you, is because you got to follow an 80/20 analysis, especially when people are sort of lightening the load, potentially with budgets coming up. Is, what's the 20% that gets you 80% there? And so, access rights and permissions and being able to look at that across at a cloud scale, that's a big problem to solve, and that's a useful one for an insider threat account and all the things we were just talking about. But I also think APIs is interesting as well, and I've noticed that with my team, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. When you right before Corona hit, I was having a lot of conversations with CIOs and their security lieutenants, and they were thinking, they were going down this SIEM route because, again, all they were saying is it's too complex. I want to shove it all into one system. And of course, SIEM can only get you so far because it's essentially a glorified log management, not actually blocking and taking action. And so now then the corona hit and people are like it's back to square one. So I'm really interested in understanding how and most of the endpoint vendors are very unfriendly with sharing their APIs. They don't want to share their APIs because they want you to use their platform. And so I'd love to know your approach moving forward. Are you going to try to keep it inside the fence, or are you going to become one that triggers other systems? I'd just love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think one of the awesome uh, advances in the last 10 years was the notion of like kind of orchestration. And I apologize, I've probably said about 50 buzzwords already on this call, but um, the whole point of like, you have different sources of, it could be alerts, intelligence, whatever, but you need to sort of enrich, like you have something going on. So it could be a malware alert, but then you need to enrich that from other systems that you've already had. And we talked about trying to get more value out of the tooling you have. And then when you take action, you might need to go, sort of delete a binary on a laptop, or you might need to go use something like us to lock an account in SaaS, or these different ways of remediation too. So you have like the sort of collection of data, the investigation, the understanding, and then the remediation. But all of those should have more context from as many pieces of your kind of pie as possible, or from your tech stack. And so, yeah, I'm a firm believer in integration. I'm a firm believer in trying to do 1 + 1 = 3. Now,
Sure.
it doesn't often happen, but if you can combine like endpoint and cloud, if you can combine cloud and network, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
trying to get more intelligence before a human has to really worry about it. And so, yeah, we've always been API first. So if you're using our product, we have a full API. Everything in our user interface just talks to an API that you yourself could write a few lines of Python, or pick
Yeah.
your language of choice, pull out the data. We've already included partnerships with companies like Snowflake that are trying to become like the next generation security data lake. So if you
Okay.
want to pump our data into Snowflake or someone
Oh,
like that, you can
Snowflake.
do
Okay.
it. Yeah. And then, like the Demistos and other sort of SOAR platforms, orchestration platforms, if you want to send our alerts into those and kinds of things, will play nice. So, yeah, I mean, I think our general approach is, from the cloud provider, the SaaS provider, let's try to unify things. But then we want to make sure we're as useful to the security team as possible. So that could be a beautiful UI with easy alerts, and you never want to do anything more technical than that. Or it
Yep.
could be like you never even use our user interface, and you just, pump our data around and make queries and stuff, especially like Silicon Valley tech companies and stuff love that kind of thing, right? So you sort of have to hit both ends of the spectrum, which is, part of the challenge.
So one of the questions I had was related to something that's simple but very important, like in the impossible travel situation where someone is authenticated into a system, and let's say it's Microsoft, the Azure AD stack, and they have their conditional access turned on, and it's working, and it flags it's an impossible travel situation on the machine learning stuff on the Microsoft side. Where do you like? Are you, and let's say you're installed as well at a different layer in the stack? Are you inheriting that trigger from them, or are you creating your own because of another set of criteria?
Yeah. So it's both. So what we do is, if we see alerts from the native system like Microsoft or Google or whatever, we'll surface those in our product. But
Okay.
also, like, I think the cool thing is we're seeing you log into Microsoft, but we're also seeing you log into Slack and Zoom and Salesforce. I mean, not necessarily at the exact same time, but basically at the same time. And so we can say, well, wait a minute, Ben just logged in from California here, but then he was in Boston for Zoom, and then he's in like Amsterdam for Slack
Sure.
or whatever,
Sure.
right? And some of them are better than the others. And so I think the cross-service visibility really helps us understand like where people are coming from,
Sure.
what access they should have. But impossible travel is actually much harder than people think. Now it sounds simple. It's like, oh, Ben logged in from California and China at the same time. It's like, okay, yeah, that's kind of obvious potentially. But what actually happens is a lot of these systems like Microsoft, they'll actually do events and actually like kick them over to like another data center in other parts of the world. So like you log in, you do some search query in the Azure UI, it might actually run that in Amsterdam, even though I'm sitting in California. And so all of a sudden it looks like Ben is doing activity in California and Amsterdam at the same time. Or the other thing is cell phones. Like you log into Slack over a VPN, it looks like you're coming out of the middle of the country, but your cell phone's logging in from LA. Like, so we've had to do a ton of work here, and it's sort of a never-ending journey.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's the point there is it is much more complicated problem. I mean, there's definitely simple, like, hey, you're logging in from Chicago every day of the year, and then all of a sudden Nigeria logs in, and we know that there's a lot of Nigerian email scams. Like, probably not you, but
Right.
there's so many more complicated parts, especially with things like cell phones and VPNs and wireless networks that make it a harder problem.
When you start combining several of the layers. So it's not just grabbing an IP address and knowing, though, that's originating from Northern Virginia. It's you're saying that you've also got the different other that might be in another data center. That user might come in through Amsterdam or a different data center or on different applications, and you're doing the data science behind to bring more of that to light so people can get a better view of the potential insider threat problem.
Yeah, and I mean, you might have just signed up for some new email client, but that's actually running on an Amazon data center in Oregon or Virginia, but your company's in California. So all of a sudden, it looks like Amazon is connecting to get your email from Virginia. So it's a much more complicated problem than I think most people realize.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't really understand that scope of that until you just explained it. So what else should I be asking that if I had your eyes and your lens of reality of your product set? What's a good question that I could ask that would that you're finding when CIOs and CISOs and lieutenants know this, that their eyes open a bit?
I think there's a connect between sort of the CIO and the CISO, or if there's no CISO, the sort of director of security team. So I think that's one area. I think the second area is um, you you can do all the right things from like a settings and configuration perspective, but people still need to be productive. They still need to do their job. And so people are still going to be collaborating, sharing files, inviting guests, contractors, whatever. So you still have to keep an eye on like kind of what's going on. And the sort of a quick win I would say is can you treat access as having a half-life, right? So like when I give someone an account, like so often we say, okay, here's your account and it's good until I decide it's not good. But can you actually say like, here's an account, but it's going to by default expire unless I actually extend it, right? So if I do nothing, it goes away. Whereas in kind of the old world, if I do nothing, it stays there forever. And so you're starting to see some of these SaaS applications like Slack and such are actually really good of when you add a guest, just set an expiration date. It'll ask you if you want to extend it. But it's some of these things. And then the other thing I would say is some of these systems, you have to turn on your audit logs explicitly. So you have to go into Microsoft or go into some of these and turn on your audit log, because if you call the incident response firm because you just got business email compromised or whatever, and you had no logging, like, yeah, they can still try to help assess the situation, maybe do some investigation, but like they're going to be hampered because they don't have any telemetry, any logs from the last week or month or whatever.
That is such a huge point you just made. I mean, like literally for any sort of forensics activities, you have to go into each of these SaaS providers and turn on explicit logging.
Yep.
And I'm assuming that's one of the things you would have to make sure is turned on for your product to be effective, right, Ben?
Yep.
Now, is there a way that a CIO listening or a security lieutenant could just kind of reversing this? Could you deploy Obsidian to see what my problem is for 10 days or 15 days? And then turn it on, and pay the licensing. Can you do like a reverse assessment and then come back and deploy?
Yeah. So the cool thing is you can sign up for a free trial on our website without even talking to a human. I mean, I would love to have you talk to our team, but some people just don't like human contact. So if you want to start with this free trial that sort of avoids humans, that's okay. And then yeah, I mean, we have some consultants who again are they're their own businesses, but we partner with them where they use us to do cloud security assessments and deploy us and get that quick perspective of like, how bad of a problem is it? Are you actually in a pretty good place or is it horrible? And so yeah, I mean, something like us, like we've really focused on the fast time to value. Couple clicks, you're up and running. Even massive accounts with hundreds of thousands of users, we're in some really large organizations, it's still only a few minutes to click a few buttons, and then we're reaching out and grabbing all the data. So yeah, I would say like you first need to understand what your problems are or how bad your problems are. And something like us, whether it's us or something else, but something like us could help give you that perspective of like, okay, I really need to make this a 2020 or 2021 investment kind of thing.
Yeah, I know. I love that. I love that because there's nothing better. We talked about 80/20. If you could really get a handle on account takeovers and BEC I mean, if you could just do that exercise, it's like the water comes into the harbor and it raises all boats. Like this could be something that potentially could raise all your threat capabilities up tremendously. Well, that's really cool. I've really enjoyed the conversation, Ben. I don't want to cut you off or anything. So if you have something that you like dying to say that I missed, feel free to wrap it up. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, this has been great. I was talking to a CISO yesterday, and his quote was, "The journey will end in SaaS." It's just like that's kind of where all sort of roads are leading. It's just a less of an IT burden. It's quick time to value, and so that's why we focused on it. And our product ourselves is a SaaS, so it's literally you're up
This
and
is,
running in minutes.
one thing I didn't ask you about, which is super cool, is that the quick time to value. I heard you talk about offense and defense. Can you hear me okay on the
Yep,
connection? Uh,
yep.
so, I've turned my whole philosophy on security and defense right now is you've got to be so good at it because you don't want to get in the way of offense. Like you want the business to realize value. So you've got to get your stuff working and be the department of yes, not the department of no, but it's like when you're playing baseball, if the ball gets by the catcher, it just rolls into the backstop. It's like we need a backstop, so if it gets by the catcher. The problem is there's no backstop right now. We got to establish that. I think the return to value is massive because people just want to go fast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we hear that a lot too, where the security team is like, look, I have a job to do, but like, we're close to LA, so we work with like a lot of entertainment companies and stuff. They're like, we have a job to do, but if I prevent this big time actor or actress from accessing the next awesome script, and so they go to the next movie and we lose that person, like that's really bad for the business, or that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, our focus has been you install really quick. No employee has to change their behavior. The goal here would be to get some insights so you can help guide employees to better behavior,
Yeah.
not installing all the random apps they're installing or whatever in their G Suite account, or stuff like that. But yeah, it's like really fast time to value, a single place to go to, and then not impacting productivity, right? I mean, those are some core tenets that we employ, but I think CIOs or CISOs would really agree. Like they don't want to get in the way, but they need some visibility. They need some ability to understand where their gaps are and then try to address them.
Yeah, 100%. And to getting to the risk, like, what do I have a problem? Well, great. Download this tool, Obsidian. Maybe you have no problem. More than likely, you have a big problem, and then you can figure out, okay, that's a risk. Now I want to solve it. So, great approach. I love it, Ben. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. I've had a great time.
And good luck with everything, with getting this. I've no doubt you're going to be successful. Like success leaves clues, and you've already had a big win, a couple wins with your co-founder. So I'm going to watch you closely with my company now too, and start talking about Obsidian. So I appreciate it very much you coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really had a good time.
Take care.
All right, see ya.